Hi, I'm Ann Butera. Thanks so much for joining me in my studio today. Somehow the equinox came and went, and we are well into autumn, and I forgot to share the fourth of my series of seasonal sketchbook tutorials with you. This one is about painting acorns in watercolor. I love acorns. They're so much fun to pick up in the fall, and they are really fun to paint. They have fairly easy shapes, and there's a great variety of different shapes and colors. And I also think they have a lot of personality because it looks like they're wearing little hats. So I'm starting with this first acorn, just painting the nut part. And it's a fairly simple shape to paint. So when I was first learning how to paint with watercolor, this was one of the botanical bits that I painted and had success with because it is a really simple shape. And it's really fun to paint, I think. So I'm going to add a little bit more yellow to the brown for this next nut. And I'm using the acorns I found just as inspiration. I'm not sticking with what I see. I want there to be a lot of variety in colors and shapes. And this year, the acorns I picked up don't have a lot of variety. So we'll fake it on the page, which is perfectly fine. Now, one thing that is important to learn about watercolor is that if I was to paint the cap right now on top of these nuts, the colors would all flow into one another and there wouldn't be a defined, distinct difference between the top and the bottom. So I'm painting the nuts first, and then once they're dry, I'll go back and paint the caps. So that little trick of watercolor that took me a while to learn, and it was frustrating for a while when I didn't realize that I needed to let everything dry first. So here I'm lifting up some color. I want there to be a variation in lights and darks on these nuts to give them shape so they don't look like a flat shape on the page, so that they're more three-dimensional. So I'm going to let these dry and then we'll paint some caps. So mixing some colors on my palette, just sort of different tans and browns, mixing it up and seeing how things look on the page. You don't have to be too concerned about reality. Any brown I use is going to look good. I really want a contrast between the top and bottom. So as long as there's a contrast between the top color and the bottom color, I'm happy. So I'm just using the tip of my brush to sketch out the shape. And these caps are really fun to paint. Now with a darker brown, I will paint the next cap. And I like that there is such variety of different shapes and colors. And then by dabbing at the page, I'm helping to create some texture, and using cold press paper helps create texture as well. Now on to cap number 3. Just pushing the paint on the page to create this shape. The caps are slightly wider than the nut part of the acorn. Dabbing for texture It's going to dry differently, of course, but we can encourage the texture. Now I'm going to paint the stems. And these colors will flow together a bit on the page as they dry, and I'm okay with that. We can refine it after it's dry. I always have fun with stems when I'm painting stems of acorns or leaves or things like tomatoes. You can infuse such personality by creating different stem shapes. So this one is going to be a little bit bigger than the others. All right. Now I'm going to let these dry entirely and we'll add some details. So they're dry now and looking a little bit bland. So I'm going to add a bit of color to the nuts, just another layer of color. And it's going to help give more contour and make the acorn stand out more on the page. You can also change the color by adding another layer of paint. So this one is turning more of a rusty red color. Now I'm going to mix a color to add a darker stem here, define it a little bit more since they've blended together. And then I'm going to add more texture to the cap. And I'll do this. Here's my scrap testing the lines. I'll do this by creating overlapping U shapes. On the top of acorns, it's sort of like overlapping scales. That's what it looks like. So I'm just painting these little U shapes across the acorn cap. And I'm not really concerned with them being equal size or equal distance. The colors are flowing into each other a little bit, and that's okay. Most of all, I want there to be a hint of texture. So that one's done. Add a little more depth to that stem. I've sped up the video. I'm using the same technique, darkening the stem, darkening the nut, and adding some details to the cap to create texture. So pushing the paint around, you can create lights and darks. So there's a contour of the nut. Now again, overlapping U shapes, kind of like waves, I guess, across the cap to create texture. Darkening the third stem and nut. Adding more color here. So these are standing out from the page a lot more than they did before I started adding these details. And now they're finished. This tutorial and all 3 of the other seasonal sketchbook tutorials that I've shared here on YouTube are parts of longer classes that you can access at Skillshare. If you're not already a member of Skillshare, you can sign up using the link in the description and get 1 month free. You'll be able to access all of my classes there, including those 4 seasonal sketchbook classes and many classes from teachers all around the world on all sorts of creative subjects. Thanks again for joining me in my studio. I hope that you paint some acorns or other seasonal delights. Until next time, I'm wishing you so much joy.